Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Brian Taylor. I'm the educator with the North and South Rivers Watershed Association, and we're really excited for our seventh and final virtual WaterWatch lecture series, a lecture of our 2025 series. So thanks so much, those of you who are tuning in, and those of you who have tuned in the past. Before we begin, I'd just like to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Clean Harbors, as well as the Massachusetts Cultural Councils of Hanover, Hingham, Marshfield, Rockland, and Scituate. Thanks so much for your continued support of our educational programs. If you are familiar with the North and South Rivers Watershed Association, that's great. Maybe you're a member, maybe you're not, maybe you want to consider being a member. But if you are unfamiliar with us, we are just a local nonprofit organization based here in the South Shore, doing programs all throughout the South Shore from Hull all the way down to Kingston, and all the towns in between. Our mission is to preserve and protect our most valuable natural resource, and through education, engagement, and advocacy programs, we strive to ensure healthy waters within our South Shore community for people and for the environment. So just by you being here, you're supporting our educational program, so we really appreciate that. A couple quick things in regards to what the watershed is doing. If there are any teachers or educators out there, we have a whole slew of fantastic content and resources for education for teachers that are all STEM based. We've got 3 modules, a herring program, which is going to be very applicable soon, as well as a water program, a water conservation, and then a native pollinator species program. So more information on our website or through that QR code. So any teachers are welcome to use some of the content that we have here for our schools. And if there are any high school aged students out there who are interested in the environment, we have a Climate Action Youth Advisory Council, kayak is the acronym. It's basically a board of high school students who meet and share their interests and their concerns of their environment, and work with us to ensure that the watershed is staying at the forefront of what the students and professionals of tomorrow are concerned about today. So more information on our website as well if you're interested in our kayak program, or you can email me directly, since most of you out there have my email already. So that's a little bit about the watershed. For tonight's format, the same as before. You are welcome to put questions into the Q&A tab down at the bottom of this Zoom webinar, and we will do our best to get to those throughout at the end of the program. If we are short on time and cannot get to the questions that you have typed, feel free to email me directly, and then I can email those to our presenter tonight and then get back to you. And so, but hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end. But again, if not, there's still a way to get any questions that you have addressed and answered. I just want to say before I pass this off is that the turnout for this year's WaterWatch lecture has been phenomenal. We have over 550 registrants for the WaterWatch lecture, and I know a lot of folks have tuned in tonight as well as the past several. So thanks all of you out there for tuning in. We've really been very pleased with the turnout. And then lastly, this is the final virtual lecture. Next week will be a live trivia event at Stellwagen Brewery in Marshfield. And so Doug and myself will host a trivia night that will involve lots of questions that have come up throughout all the 7 lectures of the series. And so if you're interested, it's free, but there is a capacity. So registration is on our website. Sign up through that is free again. But we do ask that you register just so we can make sure that we're staying within the fire code of Stellwagen Brewery. We don't over capacity that place. So, so great. Without further ado, I would like to, this has just been a great partnership between the Watershed and Mass Audubon for almost 30 years. And it's been fantastic. So I'd like to send it off to Kate Anderson, who is Mass Audubon's education manager. So I will stop screen. Oh, Kate, I will put this up, and then you can go ahead and talk about some upcoming programs. So thanks for joining us, Kate.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Brian. I am thrilled to be here tonight and grateful that all of you are tuning in. And for those who decide to, listen to the recording later, this is really fantastic. I will have the privilege to introduce the speaker here in a minute. But before I do that, for those of you who, again, in the area at Mass Audubon, we have the North River Wildlife Sanctuary out of Marshfield, where we've got a lot of really exciting upcoming programs. And, this is just a little bit of a snapshot, but Mass Audubon is a statewide organization dedicated to conservation education and advocacy. And we are always looking to connect with community members to be doing more. So always looking for volunteer opportunities and, exciting things like that. We've got some really great projects happening in terms of conservation, which you're going to hear a little bit about from our speaker. But in the month of March, you can join us in Marshfield or, in Marshfield, either at Daniel Webster Wildlife Sanctuary or at North River Wildlife Sanctuary for some adult programming that we have coming up. This Sunday, this is something that we just added as a short-eared owl prowl. We also have great things for families, and I would be remiss if I didn't shout out that we've got our North River Nature Camp for youth ages 5 to 13. So if you or anyone is interested, then we, happy to answer questions, and registration is online. So yeah. And I don't know, Brian, if you've got Gina's opening slide or.
I do not. I'll stop screen sharing and then she can then open hers up. So I'll do that right now.
Fantastic. So as you're doing that, I'll just go ahead and introduce Gina Purtell. So she's been with Mass Audubon for over 20 years as a conservationist and has been doing really amazing work out of Allen's Pond Wildlife Sanctuary and Dartmouth, Westport. The property spans both of those towns. Gina does a lot. She has really spearheaded a lot of the coastal waterbird work, and she's here to tell us tonight about that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Gina.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This is really fabulous. I'm super excited to be able to reach any audience, and certainly an audience where folks are eager to learn and perhaps take part in conservation action and conservation spreading the word, because that's really where future protection will lie. So I'm going to talk about protecting our coastal water birds, and there's a couple things. Well, I'm going to focus on 3 species in particular, which are all they're all present on the South Shore, and I manage teams each summer at specific beaches to help protect these birds, these 3 species, and their nesting efforts. And this is all part of Mass Audubon's Coastal Waterbird program, which we operate statewide, as in the coast all over the state. And we've been doing this for over 40 years, or nearly 40 years, I should say. So during this talk, I'll try to describe these 3 species and provide some of the distinctions about them, current status and concerns we have for them, and also how you can help. So first thing I want to do is advance the screen. Hold on one sec. Why is that not going? Oh, there we go. Okay. So first, I really want to think about how do we even have these birds to protect? Let's think about the wealth of what we have here on the coast, and acknowledge the land and history behind all of what we are enjoying today. And so I just want to acknowledge that wildlife habitats are located on the traditional, contemporary, and unceded territories of several indigenous nations, including the Massachusetts, Mohican, Nauset, Nipmuc, Pennacook, Pocumtuck, Wabanaki, and Wampanoag. These lands were often taken from the indigenous people, creating a legacy of injustice that persists to this day. We acknowledge that indigenous stewardship of the land we now call Massachusetts kept its ecological and human communities vibrant, strong, and interconnected for thousands of years. And to this day, indigenous peoples, including the 37,000 individuals who currently reside in Massachusetts, are still at the forefront of climate action, ecological stewardship, and environmental justice. Mass Audubon is committed to the work of learning, listening, and evolving so that someday soon we may live in right relationship with the people who have been the rightful stewards of this land for thousands of years. So I am presenting these, the three species. I'm going to present them to you as gems because I feel like framing them that way puts them in the context of them being really precious across time and space. They are also part of a much larger treasure of our biodiversity and the ecological fabric tapestry that we have here in Massachusetts. And they have intrinsic value beyond a function. So for all these reasons, I think it's important to really elevate them for what they are as these very highly valuable parts of our world. A couple other things is that they exist in these narrow margins between extremes, very dynamic habitats where they are exposed to all kinds of conditions. It's often stormy, sometimes exceedingly hot, and pretty generally a salty environment. Also, they're quite rare. It takes a lot of effort for a birder to add these three species onto their list. However, they're not genetically connected as a group. So when I say coastal waterbirds, I'm not saying that they all fall under one umbrella. They're a focus for our program because their populations are facing or have faced some sort of crisis and are of concern. They also have in common a few other features. For example, they all arrive in the spring to produce the next generation of their kind, and they all migrate away in the fall. They nest in the ground, and they nest actually on the ground of our beaches, which is meaning that they make very shallow scrapes, we call them, and rather than a nest. They're not building so much as scraping out their nest, and they place their eggs right directly on the sand or the pebbles. And by this feature, they're considered beach obligates. This is the only habitat that they're going to nest in. They're not going to suddenly pick up and try nesting in a meadow or a forest or anything like that. They're really tied to the beach. And they also play really important roles in nutrient transfer. And when you think about what our coast is made up of, we've got this beautiful intersection of our upland where all these nutrients are washing down with rains and drifting down on winds and so forth. And it arrives at the shore. And then meanwhile, we have our oceans delivering all kinds of other nutrients. And together we end up, so there's all these ingredients in this right at the shore side. And now we've got this incredible solar power of the sun beaming down for our long days of summer. And it's creating this fantastic stew of life. And these animals, these three species, are the ones all summer long who are here absorbing that wealth of microorganisms and macroorganisms, and then they're transferring it up the food chain and distributing it as well. So they really are very quite important in to that extent. However, their habitat is precarious. It's exposed to the elements and forces beyond their control, and is threatened with sea level rise, predators, and humans, all of which could reverse their fortunes. And the last thing I just want to say is, when we think of good old American soils and mentalities, we think of hardworking, and these birds are that. They're hardworking, they're connected to place, they're invested in the next generation. They all take part actively in raising their offspring, and they defend and protect these offspring. And they tend to have just one brood in a season. And all of their chicks also are mobile, are able to move to some degree right after they hatch. All right, so now I'm going to dive in, and I'm going to start with our showstopper. this guy, this American oystercatcher, is really a fabulous find to, if you get out there and go birding and you come across one of these, you're really gonna, your jaw might just drop, because their bill and their structure is so interesting. They're tall. They're the largest of our birds that I'm going to talk about. They have a very stocky shape, and look at these legs, these sturdy long legs. And then the bill is pretty hard to miss. It's you know, you could even say it's ostentatious. It's just so enormous and bright, especially in the breeding season. These birds get their name as oystercatchers because they are actually able to unlock the shell of the oyster. They have these very powerful bills, with which they can open the clams, oysters, and other saltwater mollusks. In fact, they're the only bird that is born with the equipment to do this. So they have two primary methods of extracting the animal locked inside these shells. And the first is they'll walk, as this bird is showing, along a slightly submerged shellfish bed. And as they're walking stealthily, they'll look to see if any of the mollusks, let's call it an oyster today, is open. And they can just see that the mollusk is opened up a little bit. And with incredible precision and speed, they'll jab their bill right into that opening, straight to the adductor muscle. And it's the adductor muscle that keeps the shell closed. Once the oystercatcher has actually penetrated to that adductor muscle, the oyster can no longer close its shell, and at which point the bird has dinner. If, however, either due to the tide conditions or another bird has already been through, if our oystercatcher is walking along and all the shells have already clammed up tight, then the oystercatcher will pluck one of them out with its bill and fly probably onto shore or rock or someplace with some firm substrate, and will just pound away with the bill, hammer at it at the very location on the exterior side of the same adductor muscle. And once again, they'll be able to break the attachment and open the shell. At that point, the bird is able to get into all these shellfish quite handily, whereas so many other birds on the mud flats is not able to. And so you'll often find these other birds following the trail of an oystercatcher, hoping to either pick up the gleanings or even to steal the flesh of the oyster or clam. So our bird here, well, you'll see in this, you can see that they are actually fairly widespread. The bulk of their range is further to the south. However, they're expanding their range, becoming closer to our moving north, and they're a long-lived bird, and we know this because there's at least one bird that was banded as an adult, so we don't know its original age, and it was resighted 20 years later. They do mate. They form a mated pair in the beginning of the season, and they are quite faithful to each other. They're often very close in proximity throughout the courtship and even throughout the nesting season. However, they do not migrate together. So after the season, they will migrate separately. They are they're so conspicuous just in their own coloration, but the fact that they also always travel in pairs makes them even more conspicuous, and they're loud. and they have kind of a laughing kind of cackle call that they'll make as well. So it's really fun to listen for that and watch them. And if you see one, you're probably going to see another very shortly. They arrive to our beaches and our marshes fairly early in the season, and they're among the earliest to nest. So we'll probably start seeing them a month or so from now, and they could be on eggs in the first part of April. So when they start their families, what they'll first do is obviously they'll build up their pair bond, reunite their pair bond if they've met each other before, and they will make their scrape in the cobbles or stones or sand or whatever their choice is, and they'll lay 2 to 3 fairly large eggs. They're almost chicken-sized eggs. About a month later, so 24 to 28 days later, the eggs will hatch. And these chicks are mobile, as I said before. These chicks are mobile right away. And so the parents will lead them to where there's food. So maybe the first day or two, they'll bring the food closer. They'll bring an oyster or clam closer to it, to where the chicks are. But very shortly, they'll be having the kids commute with them to where the mudflats, the shellfish beds are. Right now in Massachusetts, their numbers are increasing, and we expect that that's in part due to the fact that they are fledging more chicks every year than they need to maintain a stable population. So our region is having pretty darn high success rate. There's a term called productivity rate, and it's the number of chicks that the pair produces, that a group of birds produces. So if 10 pairs produce 20 chicks, your productivity rate is 2 chicks per pair. Well, for this species to maintain stability, they need about 0.35 chicks per pair. So essentially, 2 out of 3 years they might fail and only have 1 chick every 3rd year. But we are seeing them produce chicks almost every year, 1 chick almost every year. So that's pretty high rate of growth. They are resettling. They were absent from Massachusetts for over 100 years, probably due to the trade of capturing birds for the millinery trade, as was so often the case back in the 18th and 19th century and early 20th century, and as these birds are recovering, the first one was found nesting on the islands in 1969. And so we're now 50 years later, we have 250 pairs nesting, mostly on the Cape. But we did monitor 1 pair on the South Shore just this last year. It did not have any chicks. And they were so sneaky with their nest, we never even found their nest. It must have failed pretty early because they became conspicuous quickly, very soon after. Regardless of this growth of the population here in Massachusetts, they remain a species of high concern. And that's because their numbers are really still decreasing quite rapidly in the former core of their range, further to the south. What we don't know is this a result of climate change or development along coastlines or any other reason? And fortunately, wonderful organizations like Manamit are researching questions that we have about these changing populations. In the meantime, we should expect more of these birds to fill in areas, quality habitat in Massachusetts in the coming years, simply because they've been successful. All right, next species on our list of coastal water birds is the least tern. And this tern is actually the smallest of the terns that we see. Some of you may have had heard of common terns or roseate terns, black terns. There's many species of terns, but the one that falls within the South Shore set group of coastal water birds is the least tern. And we have 3 sites on the South Shore where they are nesting that Mass Audubon, my team, monitors. So these guys are related to gulls, but if you had to, that's kind of like saying that, that a house cat is related to a tiger. They're so agile and beautiful to see flying. I just hope everyone gets to see them at some point. They do have webbed feet like gulls, so if you're out on a beach where they are, you can tell them their footsteps apart from a piping plovers, in part because they have their webbed feet. They are also a species of concern in Massachusetts, which is an improvement because it wasn't long ago that they were listed as threatened. Our statewide abundance right now is already up to over 3,500 pairs, so they're coming along. Mass Audubon monitors about 50% of them. And as I said, on the South Shore, we had 3 beaches hosting them where we had 52 pairs. And we had, I think, 17 fledging from that, which I'll get to that. That's actually not too bad. So these birds are fishing birds. They almost exclusively eat small fish. And they do this by diving down and plucking the small fish out of the top of the water, surface of the water, close to the surface anyway, with their bills. They're not catching it with their feet or anything. And you'll often see them hovering, sometimes in groups. So fishermen often have observed them revealing where bait fish are. So if bait fish are jumping because there's bluefish chasing the bait fish, the terns will often show up and pluck out the bait fish that are rising to the top. They can also plunge dive, which is very impressive. And if you get a chance to see that, it's always a little bit catching my breath to see them. They'll do that hovering with their wings flapping, and then they'll suddenly tip down and just dive straight into the water and come up, shake themselves off as they fly away. What they're looking for is any number of small fish, usually in the 3-inch zone. Although it's really cool when they have little baby chicks, they get little baby fish. So they're really good at getting the fish that's both available and that serves their purpose. Sand lance, herring, hake, and Hayden, silver sides, killifish, all of those, anything that's small will do for them. They also have been known to eat shrimp, tadpoles, even flying some of the insects that come off, that emerge off of bodies of water. Fish do play a role in courtship, and in this case where bigger is better. So the male will show his prowess as a provider by catching a nice big juicy big fish, and he'll flop it around, bring it to the female, flop it around, show her how proud he is of it, and she may or may not accept it. But that's one way that they confirm their attention, their affection for each other. These animals are colony nesters. So unlike some of our other birds that are very territorial, these tend to operate best in a colony. And while they might bother each other if they get too close, they also benefit greatly by having the numbers. There's power in numbers. They arrive in early May, so quite a bit later than our March arrivals, like plovers and oystercatchers. Once they start to arrive, they'll seek each other out, seek out a colony to join. And they usually form colonies in the tens up to hundreds of pairs. So we have a colony in Cohasset that's about, I think, 12 to 20 pairs. And then a couple more over in Scituate that were in the 20s to 30s. These are birds that are adapted to change. They too are long-lived, and so they're although they are very determined to raise young if they can, they're not necessarily determined to do it at a particular beach, in the sense that if something changes on the beach where the colony is established, and then an event happens, whether it's a storm event that wipes out the nests, or it's a predator like a mink who comes through and cleans them all out, the birds will lift off and find another place to start the colony. And they can do this very quickly. They can agree to abandon the site pretty darn quickly. And so we'll go out there. One day there's 25 birds all busily nesting and cackling and delivering fish and incubating. And the next day we get there, there's not a bird in sight because a predator came through and cleaned them out, and they said, enough of that, let's go someplace else, and they're start over. And they tend not to well, I'll get back to that in a little bit. As I said, they are really fun to watch, just because they are so agile and just incredible acrobatic flyers. But they're also fierce, and many people have come to know them not as a beautiful bird to watch from afar, but a bird that is dive bombing them because they've come too close. The human is coming too close to an egg or a chick. And not only are they really effective dissuaders by dive bombing, and you really believe you're gonna get pecked on the top of your head by them, but they're also very accurate bombing you with their feces. So that's another deterrent that they have up their sleeve. So as I said, these folks, this species is adapted to change, and so it seems like they do a lot of hedging their bets, in that they don't go too crazy building a big nest in any way. I mean, their scrapes in the sand are really minimalist. And even their chicks, this picture of the chick, these are siblings, but they're two different color tones. You can imagine that there's an advantage some years or some even hours of the day. If it's a wet sand versus a dry sand, you're going to get different coloration. You can imagine that hedging your bets so that your chicks blend in one way or another and it can be an effective strategy. And they're also, because they're inclined to pick up steaks, they have a very short incubation period. These chicks can hatch in 20 days, although a little bit more than that is more likely. The chicks are semi-precocial, even though they've had such a short period of time to kind of bake in the egg. When they come out, not only are they able to move a little bit, but they can even digest these really big meals of fish. So they tend to be fed they're completely blown up like a little balloon with fish, and then they lie motionless somewhere under a little piece of vegetation or up against a rock or something, while they digest it. But they do digest it quite quickly and are mobile once again. The adults deliver fish, clearly. Chicks are not getting it themselves. And even after the chicks fledge, the parents continue to feed the chicks, because it takes quite a while to develop the skill to actually, collect any of these tiny moving splashes of silver in the water. A newly flighted bird, a chick that just learned to fly, is not going to be able to capture any fish anytime soon. So the parents continue to do that. However, because once they're on the wing at just 3 weeks of age, they are so much safer, and they can follow the parents to wherever the food is. So all of these things add up to the fact that low success is quite common. These birds seem to be perfectly adapted to having 0 fledglings year after year. And the calculation for them, as long as they have some number of chicks, some decent success about every 5 to 7 years, they're going to do just fine. And as a population. So low success is common. Half or even more of the colonies have no fledglings in a year, but because they're long-lived, they can just renest either in the same season or try again another year. So either way, even if they're unsuccessful, even if they produce 3 different nests on 3 different beaches trying to evade predators, they're still part of the food chain. Those eggs are going somewhere. Somebody's benefiting from those eggs. So they're still part of the circular nutrient movement. And that is, I think, really important to consider. It's not so much that every chick needs to be protected and granted survivorship, so much as long as these birds have enough success over time. And a big key to that is having the places for the birds to switch out to. So if one place isn't going to work out because a mink has taken up residence, having that alternate site for them to move to is key. All right, moving on to the last of the coastal water birds that we protect all summer long. We've got the piping plover, and this little guy is very near and dear to my heart. I just find them so plucky. Yes, they are a little pudgy too, but they're just so beautiful and full of personality. So I've become incredibly fond of them. They are a shorebird, but they're of the plover variety versus a sandpiper or oystercatcher. And they're only found in the Western Hemisphere. So these are not like willets you can find all over the place, and godwits and dowitchers. I mean, so many species cross over the Arctic, but these guys are really on the Western Hemisphere only, and they breed on the north in New England. They breed north of Virginia, and they also are in the central part of the country. So there's 3 subspecies. One is in the plains, and one is around the Great Lakes. And then the last one, which is we're part of, is the largest, and that's the Atlantic coast subspecies. So all of them breed in northern in the United States, and then they winter in the further to the south. So the Florida, the Gulf Coast, down into the Caribbean, and so forth. They are similarly beach obligates, so they nest on the beach, and particularly on the dry sand. So I'll get to that a little bit too. But I just hope some of you have had a chance to see these guys. They have quite a short bill. Or in that first picture, you can probably notice that they have a distinctly shorter bill than our many of the typical sandpipers and other birds. But so what that tells us is what they're foraging for is going to be in the top inch or less, half inch, the top half inch of the mud flats. And so they're doing a very shallow probe. And however, there's still a bounty in that shallow probe when you think about what is teeming with life there. So there's plenty of small crustaceans, mollusks, marine worms, as this picture shows, larvae of many other organisms like fish and skate, and then they also will consume on the dunes. They'll forage on the dunes when the tide is in, and so their mud flats are submerged. They're able to pick out spiders and beetles and grasshoppers and crickets and things like that. On the soft, their preferred or their most active time of foraging is when they can be very close to the water's edge in the intertidal zone. And they're most often found within 5 meters of the water's edge. And they're looking for these slightly submerged or even on the surface organisms, and they can detect the vibrations of these little organisms in the soft substrate. And they have a really neat behavior of actually using the feet. Their feet, they'll do these little dances, or I don't know, they'll make a little motion with their feet as if they're trying to get these organisms to reveal themselves. Okay, so all the organisms that this is again part of that nutrient absorbing that they're doing. They're here 24/7. There aren't many shorebirds that create an address, have a home base. These are very territorial birds. And when they've decided that this is their territory, they're going to keep out their neighbors, their other piping plovers, and they're going to do all the foraging in their yard, as they've claimed it. And so they're really 24/7 busily churning out, consuming what is produced on that piece of turf or sand. And same with the next pair, the next block down, and so forth. So they're very thorough grazers of everything in their little zone of influence. I like to describe them as having these 2 very important superpowers. One of them is invisibility, and I'm sure if people have had the experience of beach walking, you've been in places where piping plovers exist and nest, you've probably experienced the shock of finding out as you've been mindlessly walking by, chit-chatting with your friends, and then all of a sudden, 10 feet away, a bird moves and you never even saw it was there. So they are masters of disguise, and their best disguise is as sand. And their strategy for success, which has worked for millennia, is hiding in plain sight. Their eggs, their chicks, and themselves on incubating a nest all blend in perfectly, beautifully. They're cryptic, is the term. So great vocab word to use with your kids. And so they are hiding in plain sight. And that's what in their success rests in their ability to hide in plain sight. And if they have to reveal themselves because people are walking by, crowds of people are walking by, they're not going to be as successful. So that's, invisibility is what works for them. If they become visible because they're forced to move around a lot, they're not going to be successful. The other superpower is perseverance. If they fail, they're going to try again. They will try again and try again. They'll lay their first clutch of eggs, 4 eggs. But if it's predated, they're going to try it again. And they can do this up to 4 times in a season. Once they have chicks, they pretty much put all their attention into the chicks. And then afterwards, they won't likely go back to trying for more eggs. They also are perseverant in that they arrive early. They could be here within the months. I'm sure somebody is going to see them a month from now. They arrive in March when we could be still having snow. We could have snowstorms, and these birds are out there on our mudflats. They are very hardworking, persistent parents, attentive. They can be fierce, and they share in parenthood. So active childcare, if it all goes well, can fit into 2 months. So if they get started with their first eggs in the middle of April, they could hatch in the middle of May, and the chicks could be flying in the middle of June, and they would be done for the season. However, if all that perfect alignment doesn't work out, it could take them all summer, 5 months even. As I said, they lay 4 eggs in a clutch, although if they're on their 3rd nest attempt, the numbers might reduce and they might go down to 3 or 2 eggs at that point. I mentioned that they're really territorial. That actually yields a number of very interesting behaviors. So if you're out on the beach where these birds are nesting, I find it immensely gratifying to find a quiet spot where the birds are going to carry on unconcerned. You're not distressing them at all. They will show you their personalities, and they will show their what keeps them up at night and busy with each other and so forth. They have competition behaviors where 2 males might be strutting up and down on either side of the line in the sand that they've drawn, marking what their territory is, and they'll do what's called high stepping, where they just kind of like walk side by side and saying, this is my side of the road, this is your side of the road, okay, I got it. And they will do this for quite a bit, just marking their territory. Courtship also has a number of really lovely behaviors, like flying patterns and figure 8s and so forth. And they also have some defensive behaviors. Now, you don't want to cause those defensive behaviors, but if you observe them, if they're being if they're defending their eggs or chicks from gulls, for example, you'll see them really showing their fierce determination, dive bombing at the gull, trying to get rid of any intruders. They are really hardwired to react to predators. And that's why things like dogs are such a problem. It's not the dog's fault. It's that the birds are just going to react to a dog. And that means that in reacting to the dog, they are no longer they're no longer incubating the eggs or brooding the chicks if the chicks need a nap, or getting the chicks to good food sources. they're now full on attentive to the dog, and that's just going to slow the works and make the chicks more vulnerable. So onward to the chicks. Once the 4 eggs hatch, it takes about a month for the eggs to hatch. And what's interesting is that all 4 chicks hatch on the same day because they've synchronized the hatching by delaying incubation until all 4 eggs have been laid. The adults, first thing the adults do when the chicks hatch is they take away the egg because the egg has an odor to it and will draw in predators. Also, the first things that the chicks do is they get up and they move, and they need to feed themselves right from the get-go. The parents do not feed, plover parents do not feed the chicks. They guide the chicks to the food sources, and then they stay close by for protection. They'll continue to communicate with their chicks, warning them when they should freeze, or when they should retreat, or when they should move forward further out towards the water, and so forth. All of this is so interesting to watch. And boy, I think I have to really pay attention to my time here. Yes, okay. So again, like the other species, once the chicks are flying, they're much safer from their chance of success increases dramatically. So these birds are protected, the chicks need protection from weather because they're not actually waterproof until they get their flight feathers in. And so the parents continue to provide a lot of protective behaviors. And unfortunately, that did not do well for them in the early days of market hunting back in the 19th century, when the population went down to only 500 birds left of the Atlantic coast population. And there's only 1,000 birds in the whole planet. At that time, when there's only 500 on the Atlantic coast, Massachusetts hosted 270 of them. So we had more than half the birds in the world that nested on the coast. So then that was back in 1986. You know, I remember being that year, and I knew nothing about the fact that there are so few birds. At that point, they were listed under the Endangered Species Act, which made it a federal violation to kill, harm, harass, or damage any of these birds, the chicks, or their nesting resources. And this was punishable up per incident per day at $25,000 fine and jail time. After a couple decades of good conservation strategies, the species was able to be had begun to recover, and the species was downlisted to threatened. And so right now, piping plovers remain as a threatened species with both federally and with Massachusetts Endangered Species Act. The good news is that because of these conservation practices, we're up to 10,000 piping plovers in the world today. And still about half of them nest on the Atlantic coast. And Massachusetts hosts about half of those. So we have about 2,400 piping plovers nesting in Massachusetts. Right on the South Shore, we've got 32 pairs. Guess what? That's 2.7% of the entire Atlantic population is nesting between Hull and Marshfield. So that's pretty awesome. Recovery is very much in progress. Those 32 pairs had 27 chicks fledge this year. What this tells me is that not only does Massachusetts remain incredibly important for the recovery of this species, but that these birds and our use of the beach are compatible. We can make it work. How we make it work is in part because the law the Endangered Species Law has provided for guidelines to assure that some of the most damaging problems are avoided. And the guidelines include things like putting up symbolic fencing, gathering data so we know ongoingly, providing signage and education, restricting dogs. That's key. As I said, birds, it's not the dog's fault. It's that the birds can't help reacting to anything that looks like a predator, whether it's a dog or even a drone now. It could be a drone and a kite appear as avian predators to these birds. Also vehicles, that was probably the biggest transformation, is getting vehicles off the beach so that these little guys could move about and nest and not be at risk of being run over, the eggs or the chicks. Fireworks are strictly against the law. They're legal in Massachusetts anyway. And then providing access to the shoreline, to that 5 meters of the shoreline, is also really important. So, and the cool thing is that the many of the measures that have been put in place, like taking vehicles off the dunes and protecting the dry sand portion, it actually has led to a number of other benefits. For one thing, projects are more readily permitted. So if there is a desire to put in a dock or an accessible trail to the beach, it can be done because a beach is in compliance with the law. Also, coastal resilience is more likely because protecting the dunes goes a long way to achieving more resilient coastline. Reduced trash helps a lot. Our experience on the beach, it helps reduce predators and things that we don't want to experience either. A lot of people don't like sharing the beach with dogs, whether it's the feces or the fear or what have you. So all of these things have benefits. And I also think that the fact that Massachusetts played such a pivotal role in the success of this species, I think that is an economic opportunity. And I really hope that becomes something that we leverage. There are people all over, the birders all over the world, or just people who want to see something really interesting and unique, have an interesting, unique experience. To know that we have such a rare bird right in our midst, that's pretty awesome. We could do more to leverage that. So there's a lot we can manage, even though there's plenty we can't. Storms and sea level rise, like, we're not going to change that overnight, but there's a lot we can have an impact on. All right, so I'm going to throw in a surprise fourth gem, and I'm just going to kind of breeze through this one pretty quickly, but because this bird is not part of our coastal waterbird program, but it could be, and it has its own little bit of a success story. The red knot occurs on all continents except Antarctica, and it's renowned as one of the longest migrator. Very strong flyer, long wings. They're bulky birds, and they're sort of smaller than willets, if you know what a willet or dowitcher are. And they also they're kind of dumpy short. Oops, sorry. That's what I was talking about. Here's the red roof of red knot. And so here's what I'm talking about, is them being a little bit dumpy looking. They're kind of short-legged and a little bit pudgy as well. They're in the sandpiper family, and they're among the largest. They migrate, the subspecies, the rufa subspecies that we host migrates from the Canadian tundra, and that's where they breed, down to Tierra del Fuego at the bottom of South America every year. And they obviously they have to pass through the United States. And so the best times to see them are not during the breeding season, but in May on their way up, or in September on their way down. And we get more of them in September on the way down after the breeding season, because, well, there's more birds. The youngsters are coming down at that point, as well as the adults. But they're also choosing pathways that where there's food sources, and Massachusetts has sources of food. So this fall, for example, we had a 2-week period where we had one at one of our nesting beaches in Situate, and Plymouth and Duxbury often have a small flock. They tend to come here and forage intensely and sleep intensely, because they're really just trying to conserve their energy so that they can make it all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. This is, here they are, this is the breeding, the rufa phase of their breeding cycle, as opposed to the previous picture that was their winter look. So as a shorebird, they feed also on aquatic invertebrates. In the migration is when they're coastal and the marine system. On the breeding site, they're actually more inland, and inland freshwater wetlands. So they switch between the two. So bivalves, amphipods, whelks, marine worms, shrimp, crabs, all the rest. Forage similar areas, and they also pick and probe by they have a sensitive portion of their bill, and they can also, their sight can also they're looking for movement under the surface. They have a very large gizzard. So actually what they'll do is they'll consume a shelled organism, and they'll take it in like a mollusk, a little, whelk or something, and they'll consume it whole, and it's their gizzard that grinds it up. They have among the largest gizzard relative to their body mass of any shorebird. So one of the main issues for this species, and which leads to both their downfall and hopefully their success, or their recovery, is that 90% of this subspecies can be present on Delaware Bay in the spring during horseshoe crabs spawning season, and they go there to consume these eggs of the horseshoe crabs. And it's such an important food resource that they're all congregating, and they need that energy in order to continue their flight north. However, horseshoe crabs have been over-harvested for many years now, and the numbers of horseshoe crabs is tracked very closely by the decline in these red knots. So what used to be an annual spectacle of all these red knots coming into Massachusetts, passing through and so forth, now we really only get them in one location in the spring, on Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge. So that harvesting of horseshoe crabs has just devastated the population, and so what's been interesting is so they've determined that the overharvesting is really the primary cause of the decline, and so but it's not the only reason that they're vulnerable. They're also, because they tend to concentrate, all of them might show up in this one area, that actually makes them pretty darn vulnerable. If there was a toxin in the water, or if there was it coincided with a terrible storm, or who knows what, that if all the birds are right there and something terrible happens, now you've just about lost the entire species in one fell swoop. So the loss of the key resource of the horseshoe crab eggs is akin to that. In addition, they're going to face challenges due to climate change and sea level rise, and these are affecting their migratory stopover locations more than many other places in the planet. Sea level rises is not equally affecting all areas. And then finally, they're still shot to some large, significant degree in either Eastern South America or the Caribbean, both for food and for sport. However, beginning in the late 2007 and 8, some of the further south states like Maryland and Delaware, New Jersey and New York began to regulate horseshoe crab harvesting, and that began to show some impact. And then in December of 2014, the horseshoe crabs were listed at, the red knot was listed as federally threatened. And that prompted some measures that gave the law gave regulators some teeth to go and regulate the whelk fishery. The whelk fishery was what was doing most of the detrimental harvesting of horseshoe crabs, removing females in particular, because they were using the female horseshoe crabs as bait. They wanted to harvest whelk, which are it's a fishery that is of some value outside of the U.S. It doesn't seem like there's a big appetite for eating whelk here, but other parts of the country, they are desired. I mean, other parts of the world, they are desired. So whelk fisheries here found that they could get more whelk by using female horseshoe crabs as bait. So by regulating the use of horseshoe crabs as bait, they were able to help protect red knots. And then most recently, just almost a year ago, March 19th, 2024, the State Commission of Massachusetts for Regulating Fishing approved a ban on horseshoe crab harvesting between April 15th and June 7th to allow more of the horseshoe crabs to spawn and produce more offspring. So that was an enormously successful, very much community-driven campaign. 2,600 people submitted comments to this fishing commission, and more than 70 people attended the public hearings. These are public hearings where you're lucky if you get 3 or 4 people, and they had 70 people show up at one of them. So all of that response to the plight of a bird that's not yet endangered, but it's about to be. Actually, it is. The roofer red knot is now endangered, but it just lends hope that we can do this. We've seen the recovery of piping plovers from 500 birds to 10,000 birds. Least terns where we've downlisted off of the endangered species list, off of threatened down to species simply of special concern. Not that that's any great shakes of protection of success, but it's progress. I just really want to emphasize this progress. So we're almost done here. I'm really hopeful. I think we've got a lot to celebrate, and I think that we also have a lot to focus on in the months and years ahead. So let's embrace the achievements we've had, and please, help me and others think about that's very happy future when we can imagine piping plovers running amongst us without fear of being stepped on or dogs catching them or anything like that. We've got a lot of assets already in place. Our government at both the municipal and state and county levels are working with us on planning and management. We have local advocates. For example, the town of Hull has a Plover Ambassador program. They invite more people to take part. It's really seems like they're enjoying it. That it's a fun group of folk. There's other allies and partners we can pull in and work with. And I think that any one of us is empowered to get out the message and use our own influence and our own means of communications to help shift the culture so that there are some maybe a new standard of how we interact on the beach. I like to think of it as a new beach etiquette. And one small campaign that the Hull ambassadors are thinking of spearheading is just a simple statement of encouraging people to walk on the wet side, because the more we keep the dry sand safe for birds by choosing to walk on the wet sand, it doesn't have to be watery, but just wetter, the more these birds and eggs and young chicks and resting birds can be at peace. And then we can consider all the other actions that we want to take to mitigate some of the harm that we might otherwise inadvertently have for these birds. And if you are ready to go forward or go further, there's plenty of next steps, from engagement by attending meetings, taking class, even this one, talking to neighbors, making donations are always welcome, and going even the next step by participating in action groups and demonstrations and communicating, being part of your beach committee. Any of that is going to be helpful. So with that, I want to open it up to questions, and hopefully I haven't gone too terribly far over.
Not at all, Gina. That was a fantastic presentation, very informative and inspiring. So very well done. Thank you so much for your time tonight. There are a couple good questions here. So first off, where are some of the best places to view oyster catchers safely without disturbing them?
I would say that the two places that I know of on the South Shore are actually two pretty private beaches. One is at the Glades, and the tide is really challenging. However, I think that we can start to get some more word out on that. If you're really keen to see an oyster catcher, I would say some of the beaches on the Cape where they are known. West Island in Fairhaven is always a good spot for them. I spend a good amount of time down in the Westport Dartmouth area, and they have some more readily visible on the Westport River. So I would say that they're still new to South Shore with only 1 or 2 pairs. So your odds are a little bit slim, but keep your eyes out, and we'll try to keep them coming.
Great. Are piping plovers susceptible to bird flu? And I mean, I guess that can go to any of the 4 species that you discussed.
Yeah, I do think that bird flu is something that we're going to be paying a lot of attention to. I haven't heard of a group of bird that's not susceptible. I've heard more that some are exceedingly susceptible, and and that it hasn't, like waterfowl are quite susceptible. I'm not sure where our shorebirds fall in. It's still a pretty emerging situation.
Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah, that's a good question. From what I've heard and have been told, it seems like what you said with the waterfowl, them being confined in icy ponds to much smaller thawed or unfrozen areas where they're all grouped up, whereas it seems like some of these birds might have more area to not be so close. I would assume would help out a little bit, but like you said, it seems like we're just learning more and more as it goes on.
Yeah.
How does the invasive green crab play into the impact to these shorebirds, positive, negative? That's a great question too, because of the kickoff session of this was about green crab. So any research that you know of?
You know, I have not heard a strong voice for or against. I think that it would, I do know that there are they've been consumed, right? There's they are a food source. The green crabs are being eaten. I just don't know if they're having an impact on overall in the habitat. I think that one of the things I heard is there was some concern that some of the crabs are going to be predatory. In fact, this is something that Alex, right, was talking about, has talked about. Like, are the green crabs actually consuming some of the blue mussel spat or blue mussel settling smaller mollusks? So I think, I don't know. I'd say you guys, the North-South River Watershed Alliance, is on the forefront of understanding how they're having an impact on the food resources, which is probably more where their harm is going to come from.
I wish I could add to that. And should I know that Alex is listening in, and I wish I could quickly send him a panelist link to then jump in. And so
have him text us.
I was just talking to him too. Oh, yeah. So I should have thought about it earlier. But that's a great question and great response, Gina. Where are some of your go-to birding locations here on the South Shore?
Well, as Third Cliff is a fabulous place if you're willing to walk the walk. I mean, honestly, I have seen oystercatcher fly over there. But they also have horned lark, which is another species of bird that nests in the dune beach complex, and those are pretty cool birds. So that's a great spot. Well, Hull, I mean, there's something to be said for seeing these the piping plover. If you want to see piping plovers amid people, they're right there in Hull, like crazy Nantasket Beach, and you've got piping plovers coming and going, and they all look like they're just as like determined to enjoy their time as any of the people. So they're really amazing critters. As far as terns go, Third Cliff is probably the most accessible as well.
Okay. And just to build off of that, Third Cliff is fantastic, but there is no at parking directly there. I have heard of folks parking at like the Driftway Park in Situate and then walking out there. That's a pretty far walk. You can kayak out there from the Driftway, which is fantastic. But the Driftway Park itself is usually has a couple boardwalks and a couple good outlooks that overlook the North River, the Herring River, North River, and out to the Spits. Those are usually pretty good as well for locations. And of course, Duxbury Beach as well, the reservation there.
Duxbury, Plymouth. I mean, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yep, definitely. Alex typed in here, hey, we are looking at green crabs as predators of blue mussels and their impact on food supply of these, or for these birds. So they are looking into that, the green crabs as taking away some food supply for these birds. So thanks, Alex. Thanks for hopping in. That's fantastic. All great questions. Unless there are any more, Gina, that was a fantastic talk, and really thanks so much for your time tonight. We really appreciate it. This is a fantastic way to end this lecture series. And so we really.
And
really
any other questions, like direct people to my email if they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. With that, thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks to Clean Harbors, as well as the Massachusetts Cultural Council of Hanover, Hingham, Marshfield, Rockland, and Scituate. We really appreciate your support, and just a fantastic partnership between the North-South Rivers and Mass Audubon. Gina, we really appreciate your time tonight. So thanks for being here, and thanks everyone for tuning in. If anyone's interested, next week, trivia night, Stellwagen Beer Company in Marshfield off of Enterprise Drive. And it'll be a fun, just low-key evening with tasty beverages if you're interested in that, and some questions that pertain to all the lectures throughout the series. So it's all free, but we do ask that you register just so we can gauge a sense of how many folks will show up. So maybe we'll see you next week, 7 o'clock at Stellwagen. With that, thanks again, Gina, and thanks everyone for tuning in, and have a great night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.